I have helped countless medical professionals over the years, and one thing that often comes up is that they didn't originally believe in the diagnosis of ME, CFS or fibromyalgia as being a real illness, which makes life very confusing for them when they start to experience such an illness. In this interview, Lynne, a very experienced nurse, shares her story of how she found her own path to recovery rather than using a program. With a history of depression, when she started to develop a range of additional symptoms including food sensitivities, headaches, gut issues, nausea, dizzy spells, and of course the fatigue, she didn't know what could be wrong. Finally, over 3 years later, she receives a diagnosis and she explains her challenges with that, given that she previously thought these were not real diagnoses. Is it ME? Is it CFS? We discuss how forums run rampant with people wasting their precious energies on these things, and perhaps Lynne's husband's view on this makes the most sense. She knew her illness wasn't depression. She knew something was seriously wrong in her body, which is why she resisted the diagnosis for so long. So given all that, why would she possibly engage with cognitive behavior therapy as part of her recovery plan when she knew it was a real physical illness? I felt our discussion on this was very insightful. Here's a small spoiler. It's called Cognitive Behavior Therapy. Ask yourself, does what you do impact how you feel? I imagine you haven't been running any marathons lately. So this, like so many, is a longer interview. I know many of you struggle with this, but remember, you can pause and restart at any time. So it can simply be multiple short interviews. The reason for longer interviews is clear. Short interviews tell you what people did to recover. This is irrelevant to you. Reason being, I can tell many stories of people who did the same things as any recovery story you hear and who did not recover. The keys to recovery are in the detail. They're in the subtleties, the nuances. That's the inconvenient truth. It's about learning how people do it, how they find ways of overcoming obstacles. There's also some great discussions about working during recovery, which I thought was really helpful. Again, it's not what you do, but rather how you do it. And I felt we made some great progress detailing how this works in this wonderful interview. Take your time with it. Listen in one go, listen in parts, listen again. However it serves you best. Here's Lynne's wisdom from the other side of ME CFS. Just a short but important message regarding the content of this podcast. The ideas, concepts and opinions expressed in this recording, website and associated media and products are intended to be used for educational and information purposes only. Nothing presented is intended to replace your physician, nor are they a substitute for medical diagnosis, advice, or treatment. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the authors, guests, speakers, and publishers are not rendering medical advice of any kind.
Okay, so I'm excited to bring another recovery interview to you, and today I get to speak to Lynne in the UK. Hi Lynne, thanks for coming to share.
Hi.
Now,
Lovely, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, now I think we connected over Facebook. I think was that where we first met?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you've seen some of the recovery interviews and decided to share your story.
Yes.
So I guess the first question is, what were you actually diagnosed with?
I was actually diagnosed with CFS. Obviously here in the UK, I mean, as you know, there's like this whole debate about the name of it and things.
Yes.
And I do tend to refer to it myself, as we sort of seem to over here, as CFS-ME.
Yes.
So I do say I've had CFS-ME.
Right. And how long ago did you first become ill?
So my first, I believe, sort of symptoms really were back in probably about 2012 time, when my health seemed to kind of start going very bizarre. I kept having lots of different symptoms occurring, which gradually seemed to ramp up sort of over time, really.
Yes.
And things, which I've got a history of depression anyway. Back in 2012, I was having a lot of stress going on with work and things as well, and kind of spoken with my GP, and we just kind of put it a lot down to just stress, and I was depressed and things as well, and sort of, over sort of, time with it, with all the symptoms, it was just literally, stress from work. I sort of, there was sort of things going on within sort of my family, sort of bit of ill health and things with my daughter and things as well. And, it was just all when it kicked off.
So what kind of symptoms were you getting?
So I kind of got, a lot of things. I was getting lots of sore throats and kind of having almost continuous colds and things. I was getting a lot of muscle aching, headaches, and particularly for me, which kind of got quite bad. I've always suffered with eczema, and it kind of cleared up, but my skin started to get worse, and I started to kind of erupt in rashes on my legs and my arms, hands, etc., and things. Very itchiness. I was also kind of started to notice I was finding it very difficult to remember things. I suppose, sort of starting to have what we refer to as the brain fog kind of type thing. I was getting a lot more anxiety and things as well. Temperature control as well. That's something I had trouble with, and I started to have symptoms of having like hot flushes, lots of profuse sweating and things, and that was another thing we looked at with my doctor at the time. Was was I going through early menopause or something as well? Is because I was having mood swings and things as well. So and obviously then I was just obviously feeling kind of very tired, just literally just doing what I needed to do in the day, and then I'd be flaked out on the sofa at the end of the day.
It stops when that first comes on. So I guess initially, did the doctor did you think, oh, maybe it's literally depressed, but then all these physical symptoms, did you connect that with depression, or did the doctor make that connection, or how did that?
It sort of did between us. I had a very, I'd say I've suffered with depression for a long time, and I've been on antidepressants since the early 2000s, really, and things as well anyway. And had a bit back then, early in the 2000s, around about 2004 time. I'd had some CBT and things for depression, and kind of learned through and used CBT at that time for helping me kind of to overcome the depression and learn better sort of coping techniques and things as well. And because I was going through things at work in 2012, particularly, kind of changed quite dramatically. We had a big sort of change of sort of the dynamics within where I work, which I'm actually a nurse. I'm a nurse in a doctor's surgery, and we had sort of quite a lot of big changes going on. So that was very stressful, and lots of changes just generally, around that time. So with that, we did just really something, it's probably depressed. We upped some antidepressants and things, and gradually over the next sort of couple of years or so as well, it was just sort of that, but the symptoms just kind of almost getting worse and worse. I started to kind of obviously really have difficulty at work. I was signed off periodically. Most of my sort of sick certificates, etc., do sort of put down depression, due to stress, etc., and things. So it wasn't really until I vaguely recall, I think around about 2015 time, 2014, 2015. It went through my head at one point, and I was doing some reading, but thinking this could be ME. And I was sort of, and again, there really is like one of the conundrums that I've personally had as well. Is it's something that, as a healthcare practitioner myself, does it really exist? This was one of the big problems I had with the whole getting diagnosed and things with it as well, because as far as I was aware, it was kind of, it doesn't. It's it's not something really that is a real thing, a proper diagnosis and things, kind of. So I was kind of having a conflict within my own professional head and then my sort of personal head, what's going on, and didn't really pursue that at all or anything. So just kind of kept going to the GP. Yeah, it's depression. I'm burnt out. There's an awful lot going on. And I had a situation going on with my daughter, who was kind of quite severely ill with things as well. The end of 2013, 2014, she spent in hospital. Literally, she was in hospital for about 6 months and things, and everything to do with myself and things really took a back seat. Really, it was just okay. I'm having all these problems and things, but as a parent,
I mean, what kind of symptoms did you then have between 2012 and 2014?
Well, I mean, within that, I mean, I've kind of, I've already mentioned some of them. I mean, so just looking at this, I've got some notes from previous and things that I've done. So other than, obviously the recurrent sore throats, etc., and the headaches, I did start to have, I was actually having problems with like food sensitivities as well. Very bizarrely, I couldn't eat fruit. That used to kind of make my skin really come out. I used to be really, really itchy and rashes and things as well. I was getting an awful lot more gastric disturbance, a lot of bloating, etc., and feeling very nauseous. I did at one point as well, because I did actually have to go and have a colonoscopy because it had bleeding at one point, and that was investigated. It's like, is it something to do with that? Whatever. But that was all absolutely fine. I very much started to get dizzy spells a lot, and sort of kind of like very panicky as well. I was finding it really difficult holding things. My kind of fingers, hands almost would like go into spasm and things if I'm holding cups and things. Just generally just feeling that I just knew things, just things weren't right, weren't normal, but had so much else going on. It was, I just dealt with it, just got on with it and things really, and thought, I'm just depressed, it's fine, we'll get over things.
Do you think which of those symptoms do you think really aligns with symptoms of depression?
I mean, obviously things like, sometimes sort of the lack of energy, but the difference within that, I mean, when I reached the point when I finally did get diagnosed, which was actually in 2016, I'd effectively, between 2012 to up to 2015, every year as well, I'd literally, in the autumn, I'd kind of have, and what was basically termed over those 3 years was I basically had sort of like a nervous breakdown, due to the depression, stress at work and things, because I just was not able to work. And I eventually kind of linked this to having the flu vaccine annually, which I had. And I mean, this is just sort of since I've recovered, or during recovery, that I've really kind of looked back at that and thought every single year in the autumn, October, I'd have this, breakdown. But 2015, when it happened, I actually had a real proper, I described it at the time, I just kind of felt that I hit a brick wall. I could not do it. I was literally bedbound for 2 weeks. Just couldn't get out of bed, couldn't think, couldn't do anything really. And that was really, really terrifying. It was that point that when I kind of thought, this is more than depression. This is not just, the fatigue, etc., and things, and anxiety related to depression, and with everything else, this is something more. Definitely than that.
What would happen if you were to, let's say you're getting the fatigue and things, and you would go and, let's say, do something like exercise or clean the house or go do some jobs? How would you feel after that?
Absolutely exhausted. Usually as well, I mean, with the whole, what they call the sort of the post-exertional malaise, used to actually hit me probably about 48 hours later as well. So when I do, and it was kind of gradually, I suppose, over that time leading up, and then from that time that I really started to look at what I was doing, and that these symptoms were reflected in things that I'd done, and I'd started reading a little bit more. I looked up again then at the time, I sort of looked up about CFS-ME, and I was sort of reading through the symptom list, etc., and I was thinking, yep, got that. Thought, okay, I think this is the time I take this to my GP and say, look, actually, this has been going on. What do you think? And luckily, I mean, she said to me, it was actually the year before, I think they'd started it. We'd actually just had a new service locally where I am set up for CFS-ME diagnosis or patients and things as well. And she said, would you like me to refer you? Yes, please. So that's how I kind of got onto to then getting it properly diagnosed.
Did you think that CFS was a real illness, or did she think it's a bit?
Yeah, I think it was still, she's probably still felt it was, a bit of a, is it real, isn't it? I was still in that mindset to quite a large degree myself with it as well, but then sort of reading around about it, about the what is CFS-ME, etc. and things as well. And obviously there is obviously the big psychological element of it and things. So that kind of all made sense to me for the symptoms and things I was having. And that's kind of really what then led me when I was reading about it all as to what's going on in the body, as it's like, this overuse of your stress, reaction to stress, etc. and things. So I sort of looked at how energy production, that's probably like not the right thing to be doing at all, because I really then, after diagnosis, threw myself into reading and learning about CFS-ME, etc., which in itself was probably quite exhausting. But coming from that sort of nursing background, that kind of wanting to know about health, how things work, I sort of looked into it and, obviously got into sort of looking at the nervous system, etc. and things, and realizing that these symptoms are kind of like when you're out of kilter, with things, which is then where I discovered CFS Unravelled that was in that summer 2016, which that was one of my big moments, turning points. I think that's when I was very first contacted you, I think, because it just clicked everything into place for me to that final piece in the jigsaw puzzle of, that the autonomic nervous system, how that is what is the root cause. It is at the bottom of all of this. Just all different symptoms, stem from different areas of the body, but there's got to be something that you can treat one and that gets better, and treat another and that gets better, and But if the baseline is out of kilter, then you're going to keep having these problems unless you address that.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's interesting. I've come across lots of doctors who refer to the program and the book, doctors who've enrolled themselves. But there is still, of course, this. In a large part of the medical community, this whole thing that it's not a real illness or that it's psychological, and it seems to come from this whole idea, because there's no definitive test, or should I say, we don't really do the right test. Let's put it that way. It's not like something's broken, like if your kidney's not working, you see that in the blood test, or if the liver's not working, and it's not that something isn't working, it's just it's not working correctly. And that makes it, I think, very confusing for doctors.
Yes.
But and there is this overlap, isn't there, with depression? I mean, depression can cause fatigue too. But the difference with fatigue is, if I come in with a big stick and make you get out of the house, then you might be really annoyed with me. But at the end of whatever you've done, you're probably going to feel a lot more energy.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And with ME, it's quite the opposite, isn't it?
Yes.
You're going to feel a lot less energy. Maybe not immediately, but certainly, like you say, a day or two later,
it
hits you, doesn't it?
Yes.
So I find it's something for people who are healthcare practitioners themselves. It's it doesn't make the journey any easier because you've got to reconcile all this in your own head as well. Like, and so many of us who become ill sort of fight the diagnosis, because we think it's not a real illness, or can't do anything about it, or we think we have a virus, or whatever. But of course, if we don't think it's a real illness in the first place, then all the more reason to resist it, right?
Yes.
So that must have been very difficult. So then, what was your turning point? Was it finding the book? Was that your turning point, do you think?
I mean, yes, certainly. I mean, probably sort of prior to that. Actually, when I got the actual diagnosis, so I was referred. So I mean, this was sort of about November 2015. I was referred to the service. Didn't get an appointment with them until March the following year, March 2016. There was quite a long wait weightiness and things. So kind of got seen and pretty quickly sort of diagnosed, because I mean, in that time, my doctor obviously they had a range of tests that you had to do to kind of, for them to see you, to rule everything out, because that's the other trouble, isn't it? Like CFSME is a, diagnosis of exclusion, very much really. So I got to see them in March, and then was diagnosed. Came up sort of with the sort of, my treatment plan was going to be that I was going to, take part in the sort of CBT that was offered and things as well. Which I, was quite happy to do, because I felt that would be sort of really helpful. They had sort of a lot of good stuff around pacing, etc., and things, which I kind of started to do at that point as well. And I say it was in that interim between being diagnosed and then getting the diagnosis, I'd done a lot of reading about it. Then when I actually got the diagnosis, I did feel quite a lot of relief. It was nice to actually finally have a label, which again, bizarrely, is something that's kind of, again, is a difficult thing. There's a whole thing around labelling of illnesses, etc.
Sure.
But it was actually nice to be able to say, this is what it is. This is what it is. So now I can actually definitely work on something, because I can kind of try to find out about it, which then obviously conversely is the fact that probably part of that drove me, and the fact that how, part of how I didn't really manage myself much in the past was I'd kind of then get into over-analysing things and overlooking about things, and really, really wanted to dig in to find out what was going on, which, of course, when you haven't got the energy and things to do, is a bit counterproductive. I was wasting a lot of, because by that time I'd realised that, any energy, whether it just be sort of, whether it's emotional, physical, whether it's, sort of intellectual, it's wasted energy almost.
Sure. You wanted to turn it into something practical, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
An action that you can take that's actually going to make a difference.
Yes.
So you said you start doing the CBT and the pacing. So CBT, what does that really mean? Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, but what does that have to do with this illness? Because you've got a real physical illness. I mean, CBT for depression makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
So I guess the question is, what was the angle of the CBT?
Yes, I mean, and certainly for me, I did find it really helpful, because doing a lot of reading, and obviously kind of, they sort of say there's a lot about the psychological aspect of it. But I was very aware from when I'd had CBT previously for depression, that obviously that, because it's cognitive, the way we do things, and behavioural, how we sort of think about how we do things, it made sense that something I was doing was causing, all the systems, the nervous system and things to not work properly. So, I very quickly realised at that point, I needed to kind of change how I thought about things to be able to help myself improve, and to reduce and, eventually get rid of those symptoms and things. And my psychotherapist who I saw, she was lovely, really, really lovely lady, which helps as well. I mean, I think this is the problem with anything to psychology. When you do have any sort of therapy like that, if you need to be with a therapist that you can relate to quite easily and things, well, otherwise therapy itself isn't easy.
Absolutely. Doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. So I was very lucky, I think, from that perspective, that that my psychotherapist was very good. She actually had a background kind of in nursing as well, which helped. And obviously, being a sort of healthcare and things as well, which helped. So she could understand when I was saying certain things, and she'd be able to kind of put back to me, well, why? The really, 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 just I really started to properly look at how I did things, how I had basically been brought up, how I'd kind of gone through life. Effectively, I can look back at it now and think, I didn't have very good coping mechanisms, and actually the sort of whole stress factors had been ongoing through my life. I'd had friends who'd often say this to me as well and things. I was just one of those people that, things happen. It's like, things happen. This is life. This happens. Let's just get on and things. Not really probably dealing, with things. So, I mean, what I was kind of going through, I suppose, throughout my life that I'd not really dealt with or learnt proper coping strategies and things with, etc. within the CBT, being able to kind of to reflect on what I'd been through, and the fact I just literally, almost, you know, some degree, life, it happens, that's what happens, not really dealt with those things. I just kind of would get on, you know, with everything. Whereas, you know, and I'd know, and obviously, and that's the other thing that my therapist sort of said to me that came out in CBT, as a nurse, and equally that's the other thing as well, within my job, it's all about caring for others, etc., and very much, you know, kind of supporting others, you know, sort of through things. And eventually I kind of looked at it and thought, well, I'm not doing for myself what I'm advocating my patients to do, or anybody else, friends. It was kind of, you know, what would you say to a friend in this situation? What would you be thinking? And once I started to look at that, it kind of all became much more clear that, you know, yes, I don't have great coping mechanisms really at all. I'm not really dealing with all this stress and things. So it's no wonder that my body's kind of, you know, yelling. That's basically what I felt at the end of the day, that all these symptoms that gradually got worse and worse. I mean, I think towards the end, I suppose the worst thing was the fact that my skin got worse. My skin on my face got really horrendously sore and red. That obviously I was kind of really, really quite nervous about working and just being out and things as well, because when you've then got that visible thing, you know, that's kind of really hard. And I see it now that basically all these signs were just a build-up of my body saying, you're not dealing with things, you know, come on a minute, you know, we're not working anymore, stop, just stop. And that's
it's easy to
where I got
yourself,
to.
Isn't it? To be looking after everyone's self and
absolutely.
Look, I mean, obviously, a lot of really difficult things to have dealt with, and you mentioned the history of depression, so I can make sense that you would then say, okay, I gravitate towards that. But I'm kind of curious, what the approach is, and maybe to help the listeners understand with this CBT, what about if somebody doesn't have any of these? What about if somebody doesn't have a lot of stress, psychological stress leading up to that? So then what is the approach of the CBT for people with MECFS then?
I mean, well, very much. I think, and I do think it's kind of been a problem in the past, really, of how we look at psychological health. We see it as separate to physical health, and it shouldnly be. The body is a whole. The brain is your controller of everything, and you know, your psychology, the psychology of how we work and things like that is just as important as any of the physical aspects. But for too long, we've kind of really separated everything. So people there's still a big stigma against things being psychological.
Absolutely.
Yet, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't actually be able to do what we do, because we need our brain. Nobody really knows how it works, you know, properly understands, etc., and things as well. And, you know, it's just kind of all those processes that you go through. You can't, you know, all your life, you're kind of told things by parents and gradually, you know, friends and things, then colleagues, you know, and people that you meet, and you have to make decisions based on, you know, what society's doing. We've, you know, given lots of pointers towards how we should be doing things, etc., and you sort of make your own mind up and things, and sometimes they're not always necessarily things that are right for us, for you know, for you as a person particularly. So I think that's where the importance of understanding how your thought processes actually affect you physically as well, how you do things, which is why I think that even if you're not somebody who's had a lot of stress, for example, you still have perceptions of what health is, what should be healthy, what isn't, and everything's so different. There's so many different diets and things out there, etc., and what you should be eating, and you should be doing this much exercise, you should be doing that much, etc. And
it's all very distorted in this world. It's such a
absolutely
wide spectrum of what people think is normal, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, and that I think itself actually is a stressor. And although you don't particularly think you're under stress necessarily, I think it's society as well. We live in a much more stressful society now than we ever did. We don't do as much exercise, which is very good, obviously, for the body and the brain, mood, etc., and things as well. We use a lot of communications, like, etc., which actually that's kind of quite a stressor on the brain and things as well often. So I do think it's that connect between we don't accept that psychology is part of physical health just as much as any other part of the body and things. So that's why I feel that CBT really is something that's really important for you sort of to understand, that don't neglect, the brain and how we act and things.
Your mental well-being is central to everything. I mean, without that, what have you got? Even if you have physical well-being, I'm not saying what's the point, but that's kind of where you live your experience through, isn't it?
Yes,
through
very much
through your mind, through your body. So very, very, very important. But I guess the issue is why I ask you about it is, I wonder, do you know what the approach is of CBT in general for people with ME CFS? Because I guess a lot of people get the idea that it's trying to help you, like, not think of yourself as ill, and things like that.
Yes.
That's when people get, I think, very offended.
Yes.
Because that's kind of suggesting that you're acting like
it is psychological,
and that you're not really ill and all this kind of thing. I mean,
yes.
Did they ever talk to you about those sort of things? Was that part of the CBT?
We did talk about it, and obviously because particularly for me, as I say, I kind of very much came into it, and that was another way of me thinking, actually, this illness doesn't exist, yet I'm experiencing it, and how to deal with that within my head.
Sure.
Was a real conundrum. It's like, how can I have something that I don't actually believe is real? And I don't really know how I came to terms with all that through the CBT. Yeah. As I said, I think did look at it and said, I think because obviously it kind of broke it down into what was actually fundamentally going wrong, really. And yes, and I know a lot of people, and certainly within the UK, and that was something that probably hindered my recovery to some degree as well, because I say about that whole digging into things, and because I'm a nurse, and now because I've had CFS ME myself, I'm very much wanting to try to improve the diagnosis of it and the management of it, and ensuring that healthcare practitioners do pay more heed to it, and are able to look after people more and things. So I did a lot of reading around, and I joined one of the ME forums as well, where there was a lot going on, and particularly in the UK, there'd been a lot of bad press and things against the PACE trial, etc., and things, and obviously this whole thing around psychology, and again that's where CBT, I think, had really got this very negative image from, that you can't talk your way out of it, and that's what people think CBT is. But CBT isn't that at all. It is very much about you getting in touch with yourself, finding out who you are, really, and things, which that is, really, I think what you need to do. Find out who you are, why you do things the way you do, and then how that creates sort of the stresses and things on your body, really, I suppose.
And so that's the thing, I guess. It has to come from a basis of acceptance of what's wrong in the first place, and recognizing it's a physical illness and that the nervous system is involved. But whether you get a flu shot or whether you go for a run, or whether you have some psychological stress, it's all the same.
Yes.
The nervous system is not going to necessarily,
differentiate.
The stress is stress, and so I think the word stress is something that makes people think it's just purely psychological, and so psychological elements are definitely a part of it for many people, but not for all people, and I think that's where it all becomes mixed in terms of how they start. But let's face it, there would be nobody who has CFS ME who would be experiencing a great deal of psychological stress once they're sick.
Yes, that very being diagnosed with it itself, right. It absolutely brings.
The whole suffering and all the symptoms, it's terrible, all right, and that brings a lot of stress. In fact, I would go so far to say that anybody with chronic illness would be
Yes.
experiencing a lot of psychological stress,
Yes.
and that psychological stress would not just be adding to their
Yeah.
experience mentally, but would also be affecting them physically.
Body.
So it's
Yes.
not just with CFS, right, where we have a maladaptive stress response, but with any illness.
Yeah, absolutely, and you say chronic illnesses, particularly. I mean, people. To take cancer for example. People kind of accept now that you probably do get CBT as part of that.
Yes.
It's all. I think it's often to do with, and which is, I think, is the whole problem. It is this whole labelling system of things as well that causes a lot of the problems. It's still like, we don't even really still have a proper name nationally, internationally, globally. For CFSME. It's still sort of very crazy that it kind of comes under so many different terms and things as well. And,
Absolutely.
That really doesn't sort of help at all, because people will, some people I've kind of talked to that hate the term CFS. A lot of people, particularly who have had ME for a long time in the UK, have really dislike it now being called CFS, because they think that's something entirely different and is different to ME, which is very difficult, all within itself and things as well. So it's all that.
There's the whole argument. I mean, that's just a word. I mean,
yes,
it can't be something else. If I call ME CFS, then it's not something else.
Yes,
but if I call chronic fatigue, for instance, that's something different. People who are just tired.
Yes.
That's not the same as ME.
It's like a symptom of
just
other
symptom.
things, isn't it? But,
I think most people with CFS would, love to have chronic fatigue as opposed to CFS, because just to have a bit of fatigue, you know what I mean? That'd be a walk in the park, wouldn't it?
Fatigue itself is what is fatigue? What person's fatigue is, it's people bandy about the term. I feel sort of so tired, so fatigued, etc. and things, but
it doesn't
no, unless you've had CFSME, you don't appreciate really what that fatigue really is. Things, but I mean, certainly around the labelling, that's something I struggled. It was good for me to have a label. I did have a little bit. I kind of felt conflicted a little bit with my husband. Absolutely fantastic. And obviously, he's really supported me in his own way, because of the type of person he is. And actually, I mean, due respect to him, because I love him to pieces. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and he really has supported me. But he does that actually by kind of being the other voice of things in a way. And he very much said to me, I was so relieved when I got the diagnosis, and said, "Oh, look, it's great, isn't it? I know I've got CFSME, I can do something." He said, "Look, it doesn't matter what you call it." He said, "I don't care what you call it." He said, "I can see you're ill. I know you're ill. It doesn't matter. You could call it, the disease with blue and pink spots, or you can call it whatever you like." He said, "But, just learn how to manage it and to, sort of deal with it and things. And it doesn't matter." And because I guess I think to some degree, because I was when I was part of the online forums and things as well, you'd get into quite involved conversations about terminology of things as well, etc. And that, of course, in itself adds extra stress. And as I say, and one of my big problems, which is what my husband was trying to make me not do, was overanalyze things, because he says, you're just getting yourself wound up.
It's a complete waste of time. I don't get into the whole CFSME discussion, because I'm like, no, it's just a word. And when they say, CFS is something different, no, it's not. That's just what some people call ME.
Yes.
But what clearly is different is chronic fatigue,
Yes.
So we're talking about an illness, not just one symptom, and
yes,
huge difference. So you did the CBT, and it helped you resolve how you were experiencing stress, helped you deal with all the challenging and troubling things that you'd experienced leading up to becoming ill. Was that it? I mean, did that just make it all go away?
So, no, I mean, alongside, because again, when I was diagnosed, and then I had, I was referred the November 2015, diagnosed March 2016. I didn't start CBT until September 2016. So in that interim time between being diagnosed, another element of my treatment plan from the CFS service was about looking at how I manage my life, so pacing, basically. That they had a very good guide, which I sort of, did initially, of recording exactly what I was doing, how I was feeling, etc., and things as well. A big important aspect actually for me that really did help was managing my sleep, or sleep hygiene as they called it, because actually that's something I don't think I've mentioned is within my symptoms particularly. I mean, I was kind of suffering an awful lot with insomnia, just not being able to sleep, not being able to switch my brain off, and things full stop really, and particularly at night. So obviously that added to the exhaustion. So that the sleep hygiene element of their it was all sort of self-led. It was, information that was provided sort of by them. You kind of just work your way through a little sort of workbook, really. And it talked about things, making sure you're sort of going to bed at the same time, etc., and things. Making sure you're not kind of over-stressing your brain. So, before you sort of go to sleep and things, making sure you're not sort of, going on a lot of devices, and things or whatever to relax your brain. And then within that as well, and then it came a bit more when I started the CBT, and was obviously looking at ways to relax. So things like mindfulness was the big thing, really, that came in. That was, I suppose, I touched on it a little bit before I started the CBT, but that was definitely something within the sessions that came from my therapist. She said, this can be sort of really, really helpful, and things. So when I started doing that, where I was then really fully able to switch myself off fully from things by learning mindfulness, just to learn to be in the here and now, etc. That for me was probably a really big part of aiding my recovery, really.
And how often did you meditate?
So, I mean, usually I'd kind of set myself probably to make sure I did it at least every day, even if it's just sort of 5-10 minutes every day or so. There's sort of so many different, things out there that you can access as well, online. All of these things that I did were all sort of free. There was nothing, I didn't sort of, ever go buy into any therapies or anything aimed at sort of curing CFS, etc. So it was mostly about the biggest thing that I found was sort of something called just the body scan. I just found was absolutely brilliant. I think it's probably about 20 minutes long, I think, for the whole thing, just learning how to breathe and focus on your body and things. And it kind of, because I was doing that regularly, it kind of got to the point where I wouldn't ever get to the end of it because I'd have fallen asleep and things, because it really had the sort of good effect. And within that program of around that one as well, there was sort of different things you could, learn about as well. There's different sort of stressors, about things like breathing, etc., and things. And
but the meditations were quite short, like 5 minutes.
So yes, so just
did you
short
ever go longer than that?
Meditation bits and things. So not particularly with those meditation sessions and things really. Those were just I used music, etc., and things. I suppose I sort of set myself up a nice little comforting music playlist type thing, which I'd then go and obviously listen to and sort of switch on. And
it sounds like you were not just doing particular strategies, but it's like you were changing your whole lifestyle.
Yes, very much. Yes, really.
How would you describe that?
That's a big thing.
How would you? Obviously we're talking about the sleep and the pacing and
yes.
Stuff, but how do you then spend your day?
Say with the initially sort of starting the pace, it's kind of looking about what I was actually doing, and noting that also I spent an awful lot of time to begin with because of the fatigue, etc. Really not doing anything very much. So then you kind of get your baseline, then sort of starting to do things and gradually kind of adding things in. So doing a bit of housework, but then making sure you kind of put in a rest period, etc., and things as well. The other thing as well with part of that was making sure I was seeing friends as well, really, or sort of particularly. do have a sort of very good close friend who I do see. She was very supportive and helpful as well, and those friends as well were very receptive and knew what was going on and accepting of the CFSME, and they'd know that some weeks I'd have to cancel, etc. and things, but other weeks I'd be fine. But they allowed things to go, at my pace and things. It's gradually just kind of, starting to slowly add things back into my life. Obviously, that the problem to some degree is life doesn't stand still. So things are still changing, things were always sort of still changing at that time. And again, 2016 again was a big year. Okay, I got my diagnosis, etc. and things. That was the year my daughter left home and went off to university, etc. And with that brings its own changes of it, whole things with, changes of relationship with me and my husband, because, she'd left home. It was
like
just the two of us. Right? Things. So yes, yeah, absolutely.
But when did you start noticing changes? I mean, you're doing all these things, but are they really making a difference? I mean, when are you thinking something's changing, and what did you put it down to?
Well, yes, I think it was the starting to look after myself, or to sort of do things for me, to finally accept that I deserve my care as well. So to look after me and to do the things like I will go and see my friends, I will sort of go and visit my friends, and that's important. So that's more important than me doing that thing for work that they want me to do. It's that's the other thing as well. The work, obviously, changing how I worked, etc. I mean, that was like a big part of things, and probably, and again in 2016, which did come as a big, huge relief, and I did start to feel a lot better, was the where I'd worked for the past 13 years. I actually resigned and left, and I'd got another job somewhere else, which I was doing at the same time as well at that time, and that really helped. So this was obviously a place where I'd gone through all the stress back in 2012, etc. and things, and that helped an enormous amount. A lot of pressure off and things as well. Brought in its, within it then, I'd sort of had to settle into a new job, etc. and things. That was lovely. I was on much more reduced hours and things. So, but they were really great and sort of helpful. I was only doing 8 hours at that point in my life. So I was able to then just gradually start to build up my life again and get into a new routine and looked after me, etc. and things.
What do you think about the fact that you were still working 8 hours a week? I mean, do you think it would have been more helpful or less helpful to not work at all?
I think I was lucky. The 8 hours a week that I was doing the job I was doing, it was probably only doable for me to do that because it was doing part of the jobs that I was particularly good at, that I particularly enjoyed, and were very specific parts of the job. Whereas the old job, when I kind of stopped working there, where they'd not been greatly supportive of my diagnosis and things either, and they weren't particularly willing to make the necessary changes for me to deal with the diagnosis and things. If I'd had to stay where I was, then probably not working would have been better. But again, as part of this, this is something that my husband was very much kind of parting with me, that because of my history of depression, and how I'd been, and quite rightly, he was completely right. I do agree now, because I was lucky enough to get a decent job. I think I would have struggled more not having that routine of going out to work, having at least that definite I can't remember now, actually. I did one morning, one afternoon a week. I think it's Monday and a Friday. I think I did Monday mornings, Friday afternoons. Having that structure in the week was important, something, mentally wise, particularly, really.
I think that's the case for everyone, Lynne. Even it doesn't matter whether they have a history of depression or not. Having nothing except your illness and being at home,
yes.
That's stressful.
Yes,
yeah. That's very stressful, and having a little bit of work, if the work doesn't stress you out, if it's manageable, it's not so much that it triggers you, like if it's within your pacing strategy, if you like.
Yes.
Fine. People tend to be quite supportive by that. So, change work, things were going a little bit better. This is 2016. You got diagnosed, you started pacing, started CBT. 2017, I guess you're feeling a little bit better.
Yes. Yeah.
But how much better are we feeling? And what are you thinking? Are you thinking, I'm going to get well? Are you thinking, this is just better and that I'm managing it? I mean, what are you expecting?
I mean, yeah. I mean, at that time, I was still kind of hoping that I would get well eventually. I was struggling still at that time with the whole concept of recovery, and again we're back to labeling words again and what it all means, etc. And because another big part, I think, in the end of my recovery, which could be a little bit of a not difficulty, is I was still part of this forum, this online forum that I'd found very helpful to start with, etc. and things, because it's lovely to find it, to meet a load of people who get you, completely understand you. You don't have to explain yourself at all and things. That was wonderful. But most of the people, unfortunately, who were on the forum, etc., have had ME, and again, they didn't like the CFS term. They've had ME, and from my perspective, looking at things, they've had it for a long, long time, many years, etc., and things as well, and weren't always necessarily open to new ideas and things. And so I ended up kind of having a lot of conflict. So in the end, I had to withdraw from the forum, really, which helped a lot, because that was obviously kind of maintaining negativity and things, really, and stuff. And I was in turmoil, sort of thinking, there's this lovely group who really get me and things as well, but they're holding me back, really. So it was quite difficult to, pull away from that. So, but that certainly is another factor that helped, to be more positive and think, no, actually, it is possible to get better. I can see this because I am feeling a lot better.
So did the psychotherapist and the clinic that was teaching you the pacing, did they talk to you about recovery, or did they just talk to you about management?
They did sort of talk about recovery, really, and we did, because we did have sort of quite good discussions, because of the whole thing about when I was going through the whole, but is it possible to be, to not have it and things, etc., and stuff, and I said, but and stuck on the terminology again for a while, and it's then kind of when I got over that and things, it's kind of, well, yeah, of course it is, and they were, very much, yes, it is something you can, recover from, although it's not terminology particularly they use. They don't, but then they don't say, you're going to one day recover or etc. or whatever. And,
because they can't guarantee an outcome. You can't.
No.
It's not like.
Yes.
But then again, we don't do that in anything else, really, do we?
No, exactly.
Bacterial infection, maybe.
Yes.
But even a yeast infection can't be necessarily cleared up by medication. Right?
No, exactly, no. And very many, viruses, a lot of viruses and things, which are very topical at the moment, obviously, but, we don't know how lots lay dormant and things and stuff, and could, flare up again, and yes, yeah.
So it's interesting, we often think about health and medicine, that medicine fixes health, but actually that's not the case.
No.
It can be for some things to an extent,
Things.
probably surgery.
Yes.
It's the one thing that really fixes anything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. You know that yourself, obviously, with, your, bless you, when you went through your
with the appendicitis.
Years ago now, isn't it? But
And I've had a few trouble from the surgery too. So, fix one problem, you create another one.
Yes.
But, it's interesting. So then, at what stage, when was it then that you started to think, okay, this is going to happen, I'm getting well, I'm going to make it?
I don't think I probably ever felt like that. It's only, I think, since I've recovered, looking back, reflecting upon where I'd got to, that I realised I'd recovered.
Yes. Like a slow boil, and you go, where am I? What am I? Look at me, I'm doing everything. I'm not really sick.
I sort of, so through 2017, obviously kind of, put everything into practice. There was a lot of, my therapist and sort of part of their strategy thing as well, obviously, it was actually teaching you about the boom and bust cycle, obviously to break out of the whole, why pacing, why you do have to take it so gradual and things, because, if you keep loading too much on, you're going to bust again, and that's and stuff, so you have to kind of build up again, and you feel, everything's great. And so obviously I did go through, over 2017, various stages where I'd felt a lot better and thinking, I'm feeling better. This is good. And I was really consciously checking myself for symptoms, etc. Thinking, I haven't got those aches anymore. I haven't got that. And everything's still based on the symptoms or therefore lack of, but not still thinking I'm recovered. They're never there. And still having then times when I would relapse, I suppose, to some degree, where I'd then go through sort of periods of several weeks where I was really fatigued again, etc., and I'd start to get sort of the aches and pains and things back as well. And then so that sort of happened a few times, although I felt hugely better from obviously what I had done before diagnosis and things. I was living life again a bit, but it was probably still led by having the symptoms. I was still
living life as long as you don't live too much.
Yes. I was. The illness was still in charge almost. It still had its. It was still. I'd still stop and think about things, thinking. Think right. If I do that, what effect is this going to have on me? And then so it wasn't really until towards the end of 2018 that. Again, so I'd changed jobs a couple of times within that, because my lovely job that I had for my 8 hours a week, unfortunately the surgery closed, and I had to find a new job, etc. Things that put me into a bit of a relapse at the time, because the only job I could find was actually some distance away, and I was travelling about 35 minutes to get there, 35 minutes home. And that's on the top of obviously having had changed a job, I was being made redundant and things. Big stress kind of type thing again. Though obviously it was interesting, because at that time I knew this is what the stress is, and so I know I can expect to feel like this. I know I'm going to feel like this because I am stressed, because obviously I'd been through CBT at that time, so recognising what was going on, so didn't kind of drop severely, etc. This is what happens. People feel like this.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. And then, because that wasn't really working out and things, I decided I thought, this isn't for me. I'm going to have to find something else. I'd got to the point there as well that we knew it's too much. And I had to give 3 months' notice, which is the longest I've ever had to give in a job, with that as well. And so I'd sort of given my notice, which meant I was finishing around about October time. So this was in the summer 2018. And I had to give my 3 months' notice. And at that, it was kind of like there was a point where I was thinking, I don't even know that I'll have a job to go to when I give notice, but I know that this isn't right for me. And at that point, we'll just have to deal with what comes. Luckily, I kind of found, another job and things as well anyway. So I went into that. November 2018, I started there. It was when I sort of started there that I kind of really looked back. And I kind of thought, do you know what? I've not really thought about CFSME or anything to do with my life particularly since the summer, really, at all. I'd suddenly I was just living, and it was only because I kind of looked back and thought, when did I last feel anything? When did I last, sort of feel really achy or that I kind of wasn't coping with things, or, I was having like a lot of headaches and things. And I really had to think hard and think, it's actually, 2 or 3 months ago. And so, really, so it's built on then since then. And then obviously then kind of being happier with myself in that, because the new job I went into it's probably one of the most challenging jobs I've ever had. So very bizarrely, it was obviously probably, I never even particularly really thought, oh God, this could trigger the CFSME again or anything. I just got on and dealt with it because I live life differently. I'm much more aware of myself, and absolutely, I could recognise, if things were getting to a point where things would become stressful, I'd do something about it. I'd sort of plan ahead, and seek help. I mean, that's something as well, obviously a big part of it in very much being, I'll do that and I'd like to do things because I want to know it's done properly, etc. I've to some degree in the past been a bit of a perfectionist and things, and there was something through the CBT that came out. It's kind of, particularly in work and things, you have colleagues and things to help with that. You don't have to take everything on. And so it was learning to let go and to say no to things and say looking after myself, doing what's right for me, not just doing something because I think it's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
help others, etc. So,
Well, it sounds like obviously the slow boil recovery, getting better and better, and there comes a point where we don't feel as scared anymore, do we? We don't
Yes,
worry so
that's
much
it.
about I'm going to do something and how's it going to
yeah,
impact
yeah.
me? Because if you don't go for a walk and then feel like you have to stay in bed for 2 days, then you can go for a walk and
Yes.
just relax, right? And
Yes, yeah.
did you feel like that your whole, it sounded like you weren't even checking in on your body anymore to see whether
No.
symptoms?
No, and I know, say with the new job that I had, and I was kind of starting to do that, and it got to a point where I was kind of, I suppose, starting to think actually a bit of, I really should perhaps step in and do a bit of my mindfulness. I really should do my body's, and I'd stopped doing all that regularly and things. It's kind of got to the point where I thought, actually, this would be a time for me to do that again, so that I could, to revisit that and
To support you, yeah.
to help to support and things. So,
Did your therapist ever talk to you about other things like behaviors around being ill or things of those sort of natures?
see, yes, we did sort of talk about them to some degree, and because we got on so well, we were sort of arrogant, and we had a really, really good rapport. Obviously, we kind of talked a lot because of the job that I do and things, as well as being able to kind of apply how I am as a nurse, how I, making sure that I applied that to myself and things. So, about understanding, the difference, of when you're unwell and why you need to look after yourself, etc., and things as well. So, yeah, so it did cover everything, I suppose, you'd expect it to cover. We did obviously still look at things like, diet, things as well. Not that I particularly changed my diet particularly or anything. It wasn't something. I suppose the only other thing, which wasn't actually from the therapy, that came from actually something that I'd read somewhere, and I do still actually take it, is vitamin D. I do still take a vitamin D supplement. That's something I started doing after diagnosis. And the only other sort of change I probably made, sort of, say, dietary wise or whatever, is I drink mostly decaffeinated coffee if I drink coffee and things. Although again, with that, that's not so much now. I've always kind of in my morning, we've got one of these lovely coffee machines that you can make your lovely, put your pod in and things. And I always have that. That's caffeinated, obviously. I've always had that. Then mostly, if I have any other drinks during the day, it's decaf coffee. But now, if I go out, etc., and things, I'll have whatever, lovely latte and things, whatever.
Did you do any other sort of any other treatments, or did the doctors offer you any physical treatments? Did you do anything else during the recovery?
No, we didn't know. But I think because we were kind of happy that I was managing the pacing and kind of thing, sort of myself, that we didn't, sort of particularly need to. So I know often, I know obviously of other people that have seen physiotherapists, etc., for sort of activity programs and things as well. But no, I didn't.
Did you exercise? I mean, was exercise part of it?
Yes. Sort of started walking. Actually, before I was ill, I was quite active. I used to really enjoy swimming, and my daughter, who was kind of about 11 at the time, and I just always remember that once a week particularly as well, we used to go and cycle to the swimming pool, and then we'd go swimming. But then during the week as well, I'd go swimming a couple of times a week, and I was probably doing around about 1,000 meters each time, etc., and things. So
if you exercise, presumably you got worse, you got flare-ups.
I felt awful. Yes, absolutely.
So then,
I was living off the sofa, really, just kind of getting up, taking daughter to school, coming home.
So how did you
getting up,
bring
going
it
to
back?
work?
Did you try and things, they do the graded exercise therapy? Was that part of the treatment they offered to you?
I suppose yes, it kind of was, but not sort of said as such, and certainly was kind of left to me to manage. I'd say I didn't kind of have any involvement from any, physiotherapist, etc., or anybody. I just kind of set into my own sort of, diary kind of thing that, yes, we'd kind of start walking, a bit more, making sure I'm putting some regular exercise and things in. I mean, because certainly I know when I was kind of very ill, I mean, even things like just going to the supermarket, shopping, etc., completely used to tire me out.
So I mean, like when you're talking about starting walking and adding that to your thing, I mean, aren't you like scared? I mean, that's going to make you more sick, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely. To begin with, I think it was just really kind of trial and error with doing it, really. And I suppose,
because many people don't persist. They go, well, more trial and error. I mean, I do it and I get really sick afterwards.
So don't do it again.
So
but I just kept persevering with it, really. I just kind of continued to, because I knew actually that I actually, yes, I felt sometimes would feel much more tired afterwards, but then I'd perhaps then make sure that I didn't do as much next time. So it's really just that very small incremental increases in it, really. And the good thing was also, I suppose, more recognizing the benefits of the fact that it really did help mentally, though, as well, sort of getting out and exercising and knowing exercise, helps to boost your endorphins, etc., and things, so you're feeling better and things as well. So that was important.
What about the days you weren't feeling so good? What would you do then?
I mean, I'd still sort of try to ensure that I'd do something, but I probably would do, as much at all, or anything. I'd do less on days if I really didn't feel like I needed it. It would be, no, I don't need to do that today. And
so
a lot of that again is back into. So it's very much
intuitive approach. Maybe.
Yes, that's absolutely intuition. Yes, yeah, it's very much what you need.
Let me ask you this question. So I guess we've kind of summed up your story. Is that right? Do you think?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And
yes, I believe so. So yes.
And there's many people, especially in Britain, who look at graded exercise therapy, very rigid, very slowly, keep increasing, very fixed, and to try CBT. And do the pacing, and they don't recover. So, and this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Our doctors hate this, and anyone in science hates this.
Yes.
Right? Because we like to, if that's how it works, why is it not working for everyone? So what do you think is the difference between when it works for people and when it doesn't work for people?
It's a very good question. I don't really know. I mean, although I think, and I suppose just reflecting on things, not necessarily just my, just my sort of CFSME and things, but just generally within life, is just how you think about things, how you feel about things. It is sort of, I suppose, just to a lot of degree, the mindset that you're in, and you do need to probably have a positive. You do need to be positive and have a positive mindset with it, and just
why
to
do you
think.
And that is the case. I mean, I'm not arguing with you, right?
No. I mean, well, really, I mean, to me, it's just seems like common sense, really. That because if you're going to be negative and you're really not going to achieve anything. I mean, I know that through my depression and things, particularly as well, of how you feel. So within that, if you're going to constantly say but to everything, if there's always like an up and a down, and yes, there is always like positives and negatives to things as well, but if you focus on those positives, and I think the important thing probably though is not to set yourself up to fail. That's probably the biggest thing as well. It's kind of realizing that you really do have to kind of maybe set really achievable goals. It's the whole thing about thinking, don't look at it and say, right, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be recovered by X, Y, by X and things, and I'm, going to do this and this. It really is kind of a trial and error, but it's kind of every single little achievement in your day, make sure you remember, recognize it, and things, and build on that, and try to forget any of the negatives that comes from it. And, eventually the positives do, I think, then start to outweigh sort of the negatives and things, really.
How long have you been a nurse?
So, it's coming up 33 years.
Okay, wow. So, about one of the things that the doctor does, patient comes in, and the doctor will give him a prescription. Take these pills.
Yes.
Those pills often don't work, right?
No.
And they don't work because they don't get applied correctly, because when they're in the cupboard, they don't do that much. So they're supposed to put them in here and swallow them.
That's right.
What do you think is the percentage of people who don't swallow the pills that go home with a strip?
Oh gosh, I don't know. So it's probably about a third of people, I would think. I mean, at least. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know.
Because
yes.
it's about, we talk about this positive mindset, and it's like positive mindset. I've got a real illness here. Give me a break, right?
Yes.
But the point is this: if you don't have a positive mindset, if you don't believe that we can benefit from something, and then why would you persist with it? This is, I think, the problem with the pills, right? If I don't think the pill's really going to help me, I'm not.
You won't
bother
to take it.
I won't bother to take
No.
it. And I think anyone with CFSME has gone through so many different practitioners who tell them all these stories and all come up with all these pills. And I'm not saying they're all bad. I mean, some of these are great pills, right? But the problem is they don't fix us, or they only help for a certain amount, and then we go, why am I doing this? Or we don't even sometimes give it a chance, because we take it like 3 days, 4 days a week, and then we kind of go, I don't know if there's any point to this, and we stop, and maybe you have to take it for 3 months before anything can change, right?
Yes.
But that's the whole thing about positive mindset. I think it's that driving in continuous action, because no matter what it is, it's only a consistent approach that can have any scientific outcome.
Absolutely.
There's no medication in the world, or no treatment or therapy that works if you just do once. Not really. It's like muscle job, just our son, but on the whole, right? Yeah. We need to take them over a period of time. And I hope people are listening, and anyone who's arguing up about this idea of a positive mindset, I hope you're listening, you can make the connection of why it's important. And
I know it's hard when you're in it though as well, and you kind of think, but I feel so awful. How exactly like you say, how can I see it positive? And which is why it's, I think, is an important thing of taking the which actually I think we are trying to be more aware of us, society-wise and things as well these days, of being more positive, and sort of taking the positivity of even the tiniest little brightness, of the day and things as well is important. We focus far too much on negatives to the detriment of our health. I mean, it's that's the big problem, I think, really.
It's very true. And look, I can tell you that I did a great job being positive during my recovery. I was sitting here saying how important it is. I don't think I managed to achieve that because I lost the belief that something positive could happen. I lost the belief that I could recover. I lost the belief in all treatments because I tried all that stuff and none of it had worked.
Yes.
I didn't want to know. I couldn't swallow any pills. Right? I didn't even want to go and see someone who could prescribe pills anymore. Right? It was like, what's he gonna do? And of course, once you get to that state, well, how can things change? If you don't do anything, nothing can change.
Yes.
And do you think that was the most important part of your recovery? That positive outlook, that positive mindset?
I mean, well, yes, definitely. But I think if you don't have that, then you're probably not going to make it, or to reach the whole recovered stage, as opposed to kind of being partially recovered, for example, or something as well. So it's very much, I suppose, like, as I say, that where that switch came in me, where I no longer, I don't particularly know when it happened. I became aware of it afterwards, knowing that I'd recovered, because I was just no longer thinking about it, and purely because I just almost, because I think to some degree to be positive and things, well, I suppose within that you just have to be positive and also then get comfortable with how you're living as well. So within the bounds of the illness at the time and things, sometimes just that almost step back is a positive thing, to think, well, look, hey, I'm here where I am, let's make the most. And that's actually being positive, though. You're saying, right, okay, I've tried this, I've tried that, it's not worked. Let's just sit back and let's just think, okay, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm living. Let's just go with that. And from that itself, that's sort of actually a positive action, because then from that, you would then gradually start to change, because by the very nature of life, we do change. Everything changes constantly. So even not doing anything for a while is positive. Because the more sometimes you are trying, then that's the more stress you're applying, etc., and things as well. Anyway, so
this is really interesting. And that's why I'm listening carefully, because we're talking about this thing about how important it was to be positive and everything, and you're telling me you have a history of depression, right?
yes.
So now, if anyone's going to be challenged, what an amazing story you're telling, Lynne, that you found the resources when you were not resourced. Because when we have depression, we don't really access that part of ourselves that says, I'm going to be positive, so I have to blah blah blah. All this sensible talk just isn't there, right?
Doesn't exist. Yes.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what was it that allowed you to access that most important resource? Because, and just to add to that, obviously, I noticed that you were talking about really mindfulness in a way, because you were saying it wasn't really about what you're doing or what's happening, but really how you're interpreting a situation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you interpret the situation positively, then there's a shift that's happened immediately, and this is the only place you actually really live, is in the present moment, isn't it?
Present, here and now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But how did you, was it through mindfulness? Do you think that you accessed this positivity when you were under-resourced?
Well, yes, I think so, because it probably did kind of clear my brain, I guess, sort of enough to, I suppose the biggest part when I look back on things, and how even when I'd used CBT in the past for depression, etc., and things as well, is I'd still not really put into practice things that I learnt then at that time about looking after me. I know sometimes a big sort of thing that I often sort of say to my patients I see and things now as well, and about things is, you do actually have to learn to be selfish. I've spent my life being selfless. You do have to learn to be selfish, which I think is probably is a big part of it as well, being able to then to look at the positives and things, and even if those around you are saying something entirely different and things as well, it's kind of going on with that. But what is right for me? It doesn't work for you. You don't think this is right, but I know, I can feel, this is right for me. And I think I got a lot of positivity from that. I think because of the depression, I very much didn't value myself or my own thoughts and things as well. So I think through doing the mindfulness, etc., as well, it allowed lots of voices in my head, etc., thoughts and things or whatever. So I was able to kind of properly look and see myself as a human being, as and things, and to know that I'm worth it. And that's probably the most positive thing, really, at the end of the day, that came out of it. Thought, I want to do this for me because I'm happy. I want to be happy. I'm fed up being miserable. I don't want to be negative. So I want to be happy. And I always say, it's one of the things, very big things I've always taught my daughters is, unless you're happy within yourself, and, unless you love yourself, others probably won't, because you kind of almost you emit what you feel as well. So if you're giving out negative vibes, you're going to get negative vibes back. Yeah. If you kind of have a positive outlook and things, then it does attract more positiveness, etc.
I think these are such awesome, wise words about the importance of self-love and compassion.
Yes, that's absolutely.
Giving yourself a break here,
Yes.
And let me ask you, obviously you talk about a long-term challenge with depression. Mm-hmm. And obviously when you get sick with ME/CFS, I imagine that was even worse.
Yes.
But coming out of ME/CFS, how do you reflect upon your challenge of depression now? How has it changed?
I suppose, to some degree, I've not really thought about it. That's interesting. Good question, really. because I mean, I certainly don't see myself as a depressive person now. I mean, I didn't particularly when I was diagnosed with clinical depression, for all the years, etc., and things as well, because I've always personally felt I've had a positive outlook on life and things. It's always been kind of quite crazy, and people always with my history of depression, always very much were kind of like.
Really?
Very bemused, thinking you cannot be. How are you? You're not depressed. You are the life and soul of parties, etc. Things. I've always kind of get that, but I think it's because of that positivity and things that I believe that now myself. I've in the past I've never believed it. I didn't think of myself. I just existed, whereas I live now and I know who I am. And. That's it. This is life. This is my life. Yeah. I'm going to live it, and I'm not going to waste it.
Sounds like CFS really, taught you a few lessons along the way.
Absolutely, yes.
Look, as to finish up, I mean, has there been any special moments since you've recovered? Now, how long have you been fully well?
Years
now. Is that about right?
So must be it's kind of about 18 months.
About 18 months.
Yeah, actually nearly 2 years. I think it was about summer 2018, so it's coming up to a couple of years really.
So
I think.
Has there been any particular moments where you've come, wow, look at this, I can't believe I'm doing this. Here's something that was just completely impossible to imagine whilst I was sharing.
Yes. Last year we went on a cruise, our very first cruise. We went on a Mediterranean cruise, and we went to various places in Italy, and being in Rome, we did a walking tour, and that for me, I do remember at that time thinking, I've always wanted to go to Rome, see the Colosseum, etc., and things as well, look around Rome and things, and that was a real, my goodness, I'm here in Rome and I'm spending 2 hours in the heat walking around and things as well, which absolutely, even a year before that and things would be something that if you'd said that was going to happen, be no way, absolutely no way. And the amount of walking and things we did, and even just on the ship and things as well, and sort of that levels of activity with previously it would have been there's absolutely no way that won't happen. So that very much really last year after our cruise really made me realise. Yeah.
What would be your final message then? Your final message to people who are still sick and who are perhaps have tried a lot of different things without success. And what would be your message to them?
Really, just I remember being back where they are now, and as you know, part of my story is discovering CFS Unravelled, and that was sort of really helpful to me and things, and and sort of your the website itself and things was really helpful. And looking back, a bit like we were just saying about being in Rome, looking back and thinking, I don't think that'd ever be me, ever at all, and things as well. And I never really bothered at that point looking at the recovery interviews or anything really, because it just wasn't something that I thought, that won't ever be me. Yeah, I'm here, like I was in Rome as well. And I'd just say, that that is always possible, no matter how long you've been ill. But just try to sort of remember to be you, just to live, sort of almost stop battling too hard, really, and just learn to trust yourself, and take the little positive things really from every day, because even if you're ill, it's your life. I'm a bit of a fatalist, probably saying life gives you what you can deal with and things, and so take the tiny little positives from that, to just move forward and stay positive.
Wise words. Thank you. Thank you so much for your wonderful advice and your wisdom today, Lynne, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Lovely. It's great to do so. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the podcast. We hope you felt supported by it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via cfsunraveled.com And make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to it. And you can leave a comment and a 4 or 5-star review if you feel so inclined. If you want to make sure you get your free copy of Discover Hope and get notified about all new recovery resources and interviews, including recovery interviews, subscribe to us via the website. Check out some of our other podcasts. I hope you'll join us again soon.